so bismillah, let's get started. So, as the sister reminded us, a maxim. So the presentation at hand is called Maxims for a Meaningful Marriage. This is going to be, when we discuss meaning, we're talking ideas, right? We're trying to answer the question why, and not perhaps the question how, which would be like fiqh, or the question what, right? The question we are trying to answer in this presentation is around the question of why. And if I was to ask any single person here, what is it that you do? You'd say, you're a student. And if I say, how good of a student are you? You'd say, I'm either a diligent student, a distracted student, whatever adjective you want to put. So you see how the question how was a little bit more penetrating than the question what? So what do? I'm a student. Okay, that doesn't tell us much. But if you say, how good of a student are you? And then we get to some gradations. And then further on to that, if we say, why are you studying? Now we get to the real question. Because guess what? If your answer for why is powerful, then your how and what is not a concern. Like, why are you studying? Because I'm an erudite person. I'd like to investigate the things I'm interested in and earn a degree and try and transform the world around me. That's one question. That's one way to answer why are you studying. Another way to answer is that I'm studying because everyone in my family has studied and it's an expectation that I have to study. And so that answer is going to reflect the what and the how, right? So the why is always going to be a more penetrative question. And the question for meaning is the question of why. It's not what is marriage, or how does one get married, or how does one stay married, and all these things. No, the question is, why should you be married? And if you can get that question right, then the rest of the questions become streamlined. And if you can't get that question right, you haven't thought through it, the rest of the questions are mundane. They're surfaces, right? They're surface level discussions, and they will change. But if you get the why right, like Viktor Frankl famously says, that if someone has a why, then they can withstand any how and what and where, right? Because you have a strong why. So in the next 40 minutes or so, we are going to be discussing the why of marriage, okay? So bismillah, let's get started. That's not my slide. Okay, here you go. Okay, perfect. So a maxim is, so basically, because I have 45 minutes with you, there's no way that we can go through the entire course, right? This particular course is about 7 hours long. So we're not going to do that. So rather what happens is that we take maxims or these principles, and they're able to give us general truths, fundamental principles, or rules of conduct that we can easily put into a nice little bucket. And then we just explore that bucket and move on to the next bucket. It organizes the content for us. Sometimes termed like an aphorism in the English language. So an aphorism is a witty piece of wisdom, generally presented in a language which has depth and eloquence, right? So it sticks. That's the idea. And in the Arabic language, we'd call it a hikmah, or a piece of wisdom, right? So sometimes when you come across a hikmah, there's so many meanings that are embedded in it, all of them come flooding at the same time. So that's the advantage of it. So let's get to our first maxim for a meaningful marriage. The first maxim is, the goal of marriage is not happiness, right? It is not to attain happiness. It is not the goal, right? The goal of marriage, rather, it is virtue predicated on meaningful engagement. This is very important. And the reason is because happiness is not something that can be attained, right? Happiness is not something that can be attained. Happiness is the result of attaining something else, right? Happiness is not pursued, it ensues, right? It's the byproduct of doing something. So if you do something right, that feeling of achievement and that feeling of purpose that is being fulfilled, that is what results in actual happiness. The rest of it is like temporary pleasure. We're not talking about temporary pleasure. No one in their marriage wants to get married like, I want to have temporary pleasure, right? That's not the mindset on the wedding day. Someone's getting married. It's like, well, my goal is to have multiple iterations of temporary pleasures. It's like, no, you want to be actually happy, right? So if that is your goal, then happiness cannot be your goal. It has to be virtue. It has to be something more transcendent than a particular emotion or feeling. Because guess what? The emotion of happiness does not stay. It doesn't. It fluctuates based on so many things. But if there are higher morals and principles and virtues that we want to actually get to, then we're pursuing that, happiness is the byproduct of that pursuit. Right? So it's silly to mention this, but we don't study to get high marks. Right? We study to understand the concept better than everyone else in our class, or to the degree that we are well versed in it, and then the marks will just follow. Right? It would be idiotic to think, no, I'm studying this because I want a high mark. No, you should be studying it because you want to understand this really well, perhaps even better than some of the TAs or professors. And if you can manage that, then the marks are not something that you should be concerned with. Right? So when I was younger, and my first bachelor's degree, I was really concerned about my marks. Because I was in a program that if you didn't score a particular mark, you were just like removed from it, right? Every term, right? University of Waterloo. And so everyone was hyper-focused about what marks they would get, right? My second degree was in the humanities. It was at York. And I remember that the week before I graduated, I went to the admissions office, or the council office, student inquiry office, to find out what my marks were in any of my courses. I didn't know any of my marks in any of my courses. Because I was like much older when I did that degree, and I had actually learned how to study, and it wasn't about the marks, it was about making sure you understand the content, right? It was a very different mindset. Okay, so similarly, if the goal for a marriage is like our goal is happiness, then the thing is that that's not many times in our control. So if you have a goal which is not in your control, it's very frustrating. Right? You're setting yourself up for failure and disappointment. But if your goal is that we together as a unit are going to achieve this sort of virtuous goal, or we're going to accomplish this, and we're going to do this, and these are all outlined and they're achievable and they're milestones to these particular goals that you set up, then happiness will come the moment you start meeting these milestones as a byproduct. It's very important to understand that. And look what the Quran says. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is in Surah Al-Nahl, that man amila salihan ba'da aqul a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. He says, whoever does a righteous deed, whoever works righteously, min dhakarin aw untha, regardless if they're male or female, wa huwa mu'min, right? And they do it while in a state of belief, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives what? He promises for happiness for people who do good things. If you do the right things, you're happy. Is that what the Quran says? No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises hayatan tayyiba. We will bless them with a life filled with tayyiba, goodness, not happiness, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we will reward them of the best of what they send forward, of the best of what they do. This is a very important thing because in the modern world that we embody, we inhabit, there is a lot of sloganeering on how to become happy. There's entire industries on how to become really, really happy with everything. And the ancient traditions tell us that happiness is never pursued. It is not in your control. It's a result of just doing right things, right? So if we busy ourselves with pursuing happiness, seldom will we actually acquire it. But if we busy ourselves in pursuing that which is pleasing to Allah, then happiness is a gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows. And even if He doesn't, it's good because we believe in akhirah, right? This is a person who was in a concentration camp, and he observed people in concentration camps, right? So a Holocaust survivor. And this is what he has to say about this. For success, so you can intuit that in marriage as well, success in marriage. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue, and it only does so as the unintended. You don't intend for it. Unintended side effect. So it's like the dessert, it's not even the meal. Of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself. All right, so what is marriage then? The first maxim, if I can sum it up. Marriage is when you make someone else a bigger priority in your life than you are. Right? So when you get married, and this goes both ways, right? The wife has to do that for the husband has to do that for the wife. That you make somebody else a bigger priority than you are. So they are the cause, right? They become the cause. You see this? Of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as a byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself, right? So this is exactly what he's saying. of one surrendering to a person other than themselves, right? So that's how you get happiness, according to him, right? Happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it, by not pursuing it. Yes. This analogy can be used for a lot of things. It's used for wealth as well. How do you garner a lot of wealth? You become really good at what you do, and you adopt the best of character, right? With those two things, with a lot of skill and good character, if you pursue those things, then risk is something that follows you. Like Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah said, risk is like the shadow. If you try to grab it, you can't grab it, it keeps moving. But if you ignore it and just do the thing you're supposed to do, then it will follow you, right? You don't have to pursue it, it pursues you, but you have to become worthy of that pursuit. So that's the idea, okay? I hope everyone understands maxim number 1. Maxim number 2. That was supposed to take us 4 minutes. It took us 12, which is okay. Okay, maxim number 2. There is no virtue in masking. So it's a typo there. There's no virtue. There's no typo. There is no virtue masking yourself from the one you are most exposed to, right? Which means that you have to be transparent. And a lot of us don't know how to do that. We just don't. Right? Like to speak the truth is a skill that has to be practiced. I know everybody knows, yeah, of course, we have to speak the truth as Muslims. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about in every given scenario to actually say the truest thing that can be said in that moment. Okay? That's a skill that needs practicing. Like we have to actively do that. It's not a passive thing. We have to actively do that. Like you can start with something small, you know, how are you doing? Practice trying to answer that question. It's a very difficult question to answer. That's a very complicated question. Someone asks you, how are you doing? So, well, I don't even know. Let me think. Yeah, I don't know how I'm doing right now. I gotta like you know, كيف حالك في العربية? What's your state? Yeah, how is your state? What's your state? Right? I had a teacher, and you know, you had to answer him like this. He asks you, how are you doing? Like كيف حالك? You have to answer like, you know, في طاعة الله, في شكر الله. You have to say like, I'm in the state of being grateful to God. I'm being patient to God. Because the idea is that that's not a frivolous question. It's like a meaningless thing that we say. It's like just a kalam fadi, right? To basically fill in words. So how are you doing? I'm good. I'm good too. Let's move on. Like that's just air, right? I'm giving you an example, but when we interact with actual human beings, right? Specifically, if that human being happens to be your spouse, then there's a level of authenticity that must permeate that interaction, right? Because we, you know, Nietzsche said we put masks, many masks when we're interacting with the world, right? So when we're with our best friends, some of those masks come off. When we're with our parents, some of those masks come on, but other masks come on. Some of them come off, some of them come on. We do this thing, right? But the person that we're actually exposed to, and I physically mean that because, you know, the Quran will tell us that, that verse is not here, but there's a verse in the Quran, in many places in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says you have to be chaste, right? Right? The believers are those who guard their private, hafidhina ala furujihim, right? Except in the case of your spouses, right? So we're the most exposed in the world in front of our spouses. They have access to us the way that nobody else has access to us. So it would be a shame that we're not exposing our real, authentic self to them. That'd be a shame, right? Because you get to have a distance with every other relationship, but in this relationship, it's very difficult to have a distance, right? So that's the idea. Be authentic to receive authenticity, because if you have your guard up and you're not authentic with this person, what is the guarantee that they're not only mirroring that too? And then this is a relationship that is not real, right? So like your spouse has to really know. They have to really get to know you. And you have to really get to know them. But that doesn't happen unless you actually are vulnerable enough to expose yourself. This is especially true for men, because a lot of men have their guards up. They feel very uncomfortable showing weakness, right? So this is very, very important, to be authentic. The Prophet ﷺ said, ad-dinu nasiha, our entire religion is being genuine with people. Like we should be like that with everybody. If we should be genuine with everyone, how much more so than our spouses, He was asked, well, to who should we be genuine? And the Prophet said, towards Allah's book, right? In terms of his sincerity, towards his messenger, in terms of obedience, towards the leadership, in terms of our covenant with them, and for everybody else as well. Like, be an authentic person, right? Don't have any masks when you're with people, and more so with your spouse than anyone else. Maxim number 3. By the way, that goes to like speaking the truth, right? Because there's the easiest way to be genuine is just to be truthful in things, right? And people think it's easy to speak the truth. It's one of the most difficult things in the world if you want to do it right. Speaking the truth is very difficult. That's why it's such a high virtue. It's not easy to speak the truth, right? If you're always speaking the truth, you're always in trouble with people, right? That's why it's good to learn eloquence so that you can speak the truth but not be offensive. You gotta learn that. That's a different skill. Okay, maxim number 3. Right, so romance is post-marriage. It's a post-marriage proposition. And courting is a pre-marriage proposition. Because what do most people do? They waste away all of their romance pre-marriage. And so once they get married, there's nothing left in the tank, right? It's a horrible thing to do, right? So I was in a counseling session. I do marriage coaching. So there's a guy there. He's young. He's like 24. He's a kid, all right? And they're having some marital discord. And I said, look, what's happening here? He says, she's always asking to be on dates. And it's like, I already did that when we were engaged. Like, we did that. Like, we're past that. Like, we're a mature couple. And I said, before you got married, did you tell her that I'm getting married to you because that means I don't have to spend a lot of time with you anymore? Because if you had phrased it like that, there's a high chance she wouldn't have agreed to get married to you, man. Right? So romance is a post-marriage proposition, meaning the longer we're married, the more romantic we'd have to be, right? Not less, but the longer you're married 5 years, your romance level is like here. You know, 10 years, it has to go up here because you have to introduce a lot of novelty in it, right? Because if you don't, then things get mundane, right? And courting is a pre-marriage proposition. So you know what people get wrong? People put a lot of romance pre-marriage. And a lot of that would be like borderline haram stuff going on, right? But courting is about respectfully treating someone. That's what courting is. So pre-marriage, how many people here are married? Okay, a couple of people. That's it. Is your spouse here? No? Right, okay. So just like 3 of us, right? Sorry, are you married? I didn't see behind. Okay. Right, so 3 people here are married. Okay, so what happens pre-marriage is that a lot of interactions are flirtatious interactions. Naturally so, by the way. And so what we need to learn to do is turn those interactions into courting interactions. Courting is a gentleman's work, right? It's about how do you honor and respect with chivalry the other person. That's what courting is. It has nothing to do with flirtation. It has nothing to do with that. It has a lot to do with service. It has a lot to do with being a gentleman. Whereas romance is flirtatious by nature, and that is supposed to be left for after marriage, right? So look what the Prophet ﷺ, Sunan al-Nasa'i, and Aisha radiyallahu anha, قالت كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. The Prophet ﷺ would يدع فاه على الموضع الذي أشرب منه. The Prophet ﷺ would put his lips onto the cup where I had drank from at the same spot that I had drank from. Because the cup is like this, it's got a radius, right? But the Prophet would deliberately put his lips and drink from the portion, the place where she drank from. Min fadli suri wa ana ha'id. And she's trying to make a point that, you know, her menstruation did not stop the Prophet from interacting with her in a loving, romantic, and flirtatious manner, right? So this is how the Prophet was. This is in his marriage, that he's careful about this, right? The Prophet said, عن سعيد بن أبي وقاص أنه أخبره أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إنك لن تنفق نفقة تبتغي بها وجه الله إلا أجرت عليها. Yeah, there's nothing good that you do except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards you, right? Nothing that you spend from your wealth for the sake of Allah except that Allah rewards you. حتى, including ما تجعل في فم امرأتك, what you place with your own hands into your spouse's mouth. Right? He's talking about feeding your spouse. Right? And I know for a lot of us, we didn't grow up watching our fathers feed our mothers by their hands. Yes? Did anyone grow up with that, with this sunnah? Right? Okay, so we need to revive these things, you guys. Seriously. These things are easily revivable. So at least the next generation, like our children, they see the father feeding the mother. Like, not always, right? Let's say like, this is what you do. Yeah, I might as well put a bib on her, right? You're not talking about that. You're saying that from time to time, out of love, all right? Out of love and concern to do that, okay? I once said this to someone, and he goes, yeah, I have done that. And his wife sitting beside me, she's like, yes, when I had gone through surgery, that's the 2 weeks he was doing that. You know, he doesn't do it out of love, it was out of necessity, right? Right. Okay, another narration about this, that أن عائشة حدثتها أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يتكئ في حجري وأنا حائض. The Prophet would lay upon her lap, right? Sayyidina Aisha's lap, while she would be menstruating. ثم يقرأ القرآن. And then he'd be reciting the Quran. And why is she mentioning this? She's mentioning this because it was taboo to mix sacredness with the state of menstruation. And she's saying, no, he would be on my lap while I was menstruating, reciting the Quran, right? But look at that. Look, can you imagine the scene? The Prophet ﷺ, from his blessed lips, he was the one who the Quran was revealed to. He's just reciting away in the lap of Sayyidatuna Aisha, right? Okay, maxim number 4. All right. It says here, your spouse is your partner in the adventure of life. And that's a good way of understanding how adulthood works, right? Because adventures are challenges, they're very difficult to go through, and you don't know what to expect, and that's adulthood, all right? And so then, you don't have to do it alone, you get to have a partner, right? Take adventures together to make the marriage bond more memorable and purposeful, right? And that's why people say, I created a life with this person, right? And they don't mean just babies, they actually mean like my life, like you create a life, and you better have someone who has the tools to create this life. It is very difficult to do this, right? So, for example, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sayyidatuna Aisha reports that أنها كانت مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في سفر. She was once in a journey with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and فسبقته على رجليها. So they went on a foot race, right? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam lost. He lost, Sayyidatuna Aisha, right? Because people forget, like, the Prophet was fairly old, right? He's in Medina, he's in his 50s, right? When the hijrah happens, he's 53, when the hijrah happens, okay? And so, it says, حَمَلْتُ اللَّحْمِ. She says, then I gained a little bit of weight. Yeah, Sayyidatuna Aisha saying, then I gained a little bit of weight. And then she says, سَبَقْتُهُ فَسَبَقَنِي. So then I raced with him, and he beat me. Right? So the Prophet was much older now. So the older Prophet, right, was able to beat her. And you know what? For me, this was like, okay, that's amazing. But you know what the cool part is? Is this part. فقال, the Prophet said, هذه, right, بتلك السبقة. The Prophet said, this is for that other time. Right? He's saying, I'm just taking my revenge. You know, I remember that I lost before. So this is for that. That's what he's saying. Right? So notice that this particular marriage is not stagnant. This particular marriage is creative. Right? And this was the case every time the Prophet traveled. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا أراد سفرا. When the Prophet would intend to travel anywhere, أقرأ بين نسائه. He would draw lots between his spouses. Right? And he would make sure that whoever's name pops up, خرج بها معه, that he would always travel with a spouse. He won't do solo trips anywhere he went. right? Because he was a leader of a community, he would go onto a lot of these excursions, these expeditions. He would not ever go alone. There's always would be a spouse with him, right? To take on that adventure of life. And by the way, this is true for a lot of things. You know how difficult everything is, like everything, as an adult, like everything. It's not about just, you know, maintaining the house and groceries and children. It's like every single thing. And if you have a partner with you who is willing to take on that adventure, right? Versus someone else who perhaps is antagonistic to your pursuits. It's a very different world, right? Maxim number 5. Understand that divorce is a fire exit. This is one of the imtithal that is given, the method that is given. An example for divorce. So unless there is fire, you are shackled together, right? Because you only use the fire exit when there is a fire. Fire means unless there is particular harm that is coming to you or to the other person, or there's particular harm that's coming to you emotionally, spiritually, these type of things. Otherwise, you don't intend to get married for the sake of leaving this marriage, right? So you're shackled together. That's really important. Why? Because, let me give you an analogy here. If there's an individual who is like not so great, and someone has opted to marry them, then that is proof that they're also not so great. Yes, because if they were, they wouldn't have accepted this marriage, right? Let me put it out in a different way. If there's anyone who is actually interested in you, in the current state that you are in, then that's a red light that this person, perhaps that's a sign that this person might not be very worthy. Because if they're interested in you, and you know what your reality is, then the person interested in this version of you, is that person worthy of being committed to? Like if that's their standard, it's a very low standard, right? Like me, in your case, you, that'd be a very low standard. Does that make sense? The idea is that, okay, let me say it in a nice way. Okay, we often, as individuals, are looking at the current state, and we're saying, look, this person is the right person for me. Yeah, for you in your current state, but like you 5 years later is not you today, right? And so a person is, you're actually not getting married to the person right now. You're actually getting married to, one of the Maxims will tell us, to this person 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. That's the person you're actually marrying. So you have to chart out their trajectory. Like their trajectory, if it's like this now, what is it going to be their trajectory in 5 years? Because that's the person I'm going to be living with every day, right? So it becomes, you have to fine tune this. So when you're shackled together, what happens is that you don't have a choice but to let this person in. You don't have a choice but to be transparent with this person because there's nowhere to go, right? And if there is somewhere to go, by the way, which is like what happens in the non-Muslim communities, right? People like are sort of married without marriage, prior to marriage. You know what I mean? Like they live together and everything is exactly like they would be if they were married, but they're not married. What they're actually saying is that, look, we're not committed to the degree that we are going to be taking this more seriously. Or another way they're saying is that you're replaceable. I really like you, but you're replaceable, right? And the other person was, why would someone agree to this? Because they're saying the same thing. That's why they agree to this, right? Whereas in the Sharia, when you're living together, you're married together, which means you're shackled in here. And you better figure things out, because if you don't figure things out, then it only gets worse. You know, like when we're individuals and we have problems, but we don't figure it out, the consequences aren't that wild because there's only us, right? And it's our problems. But when you're in a marriage and you can't figure things out, things multiply, right? It's a snowball effect, right? Okay. So let me give you an example of this so that it makes sense. Many times I get couples in session and basically the wife has dragged this guy to the therapy session, right? He's want to be there. She's probably blackmailed him to be here, right? I would say like 60% of the time, that's what happens, 60% of the time. Okay, so he's sitting there and she's saying, look, you know, this, and this. And he's like, I've told her that I will change. right? Like 60% of the time. You could ask all the other, I think there are a couple of shuyukh here who are also therapists, right? Ask them this, they'll tell you. It's like, oh, he said he'll change. So he'll take the trash out on time, or not be late to pick up the kids, right? All whatever the list is, there's a laundry list. And he's like, yeah, I'll do it starting next week, or I'll do it starting tomorrow, or something like that. Without understanding that what's actually happened is that that's not the issue. The issue is that she first asked you to do something, or you should have done something. And this goes both ways, right? It could be like, speak nicely to my mother, right? Something serious as that, or it could be something mundane, like make sure you pick up the groceries on time. Something mundane or something very serious. It doesn't matter what it is. And then you repeatedly ignored this person, repeatedly. And so this person now knows that you don't care for them like you used to. That's what they figured out. So next time you do anything, it's not that thing that's important. That thing is now not the issue. The issue is that they're convinced you don't care anymore. And so because they're convinced you don't care anymore, they're not affectionate towards you. Right? And so although you have like 6 issues, you don't have 6 issues. It's that one issue that started 2 years ago that was never addressed. And because that was never addressed and it was a big deal, everything snowballed from there. Right? And so when you are shackled to a person, they're your prison mate. So you better learn to get along with your prison mate, because you're already in prison. Life is already tough. And so you don't want to make prison more tough. And why I use the prison analogy? Because ad-dunya sijnul mu'min. The Prophet said this. He said the dunya is a prison for the believer. Okay, so might as well find a better prison mate, because this is reality for us. If you're spiritual, you're going to have to take dunya very seriously. And you can't do that properly if the person beside you is not taking dunya very seriously. They're not taking their Lord very seriously. They're not taking you very seriously. Right? Okay, so the Quran says that this is a famous hadith, a famous verse that you hear in every nikah ceremony, right? وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. From the miraculous signs of God, these are ayah means in the Quran miracle. From the miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that He has created spouses for you, right? لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, right? And so the reason I mentioned this verse here is because the purpose of a marriage is that it doesn't end in flames. Because Allah is telling us that what the purpose is that لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, so that you find comfort through them. You're supposed to find comfort through your spouse. Because don't you need comfort in a prison? There's one place you need a lot extra comfort. It'd be the prison. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. So those are the goals. And other shuyukh have spoken about this in the morning. Yes? Okay, so we're not going to talk about this. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Right? And these are signs for people who are contemplative. They're thinking through their life. Okay, maxim number 6. Marriage is a system of optimization. So you have to renew yourself to a higher level. So let me give, this is best explained with an analogy, right? So imagine there's a brother and a sister, they're getting married, right? They're not brothers and sisters, that would be haram. Like the brother and sister, they're getting married, right? So we call him brother Adam, and we call her sister Fatima. I apologize if there's any Adams here and if there's any Fatimas, random names, okay? Adam and Fatima are getting married. And so Adam is 26, Fatima is 23. And what's happening is for 26 years, Adam has had a life. So he's constructed a building, metaphorically, called Adam. This building is tall, it's 26 stories long, all right? And it's got Adam's memories, his habits, his friends, all of the stuff is Adam's, all right? And Fatma's did the same thing. She's got a 23-story building, and it's called Fatma Incorporated, right? And that's her thing. She's got her memories and her friends and her habits and quirks and pitfalls and successes and achievements, right? Okay, and now they're about to get married. So what needs to happen is that brother Adam needs to grab a sledgehammer, okay? And take this building down. Not Fatma Incorporated, right? Adam Incorporated. He's got to take it down, fully down, rubble. And she's got to do the same thing to her building, okay? And then through this ruckus, this debris, Adam is supposed to find the best parts of Adam, the best parts of Adam, right? Build it, bring it. And then Fatima is supposed to find the best parts of Fatima, collect that and bring it, and then construct Adam and Fatima incorporated with the best versions of Adam and Fatima. And that is a very, very difficult task to do. And that's why the first 3 to 5 years of marriage are very difficult if you're doing it right. Because if you're doing it right, that's what it looks like, right? You have to get rid of your habits that your parents are used to. You know, like parents say ridiculous things. Oh yeah, he's just a slob. What? How are you okay with that? Right? Oh, he's just an angry person. You know, parents say that. Like, I have 3 kids. He's just so angry. It's like, well, you should have fixed that when he was 6, right? Or 8, or 9, or 12. Not at 26 when he's getting married. It's like, oh, just letting you know, he's got a temper problem. It's like, what did you didn't forget to parent him, right? You see? But a spouse won't do that. They're not going to say, oh, I'm just married to a really, like, you know, an angry person. No, they would work on that. They should. They better. This is one of the maxims that's coming up, because one of our jobs as human beings is that we're miratul mu'min. We're supposed to show an image of the person to them. That's what the Prophet said. Al-mu'min miratul mu'min. A believer is a mirror to the other believer, which means if they have any flaws, what does the mirror do, by the way? The mirror exposes your flaws to you, right? Also exposes your beauty to you. That's the other part of it. But it also exposes flaws. So a spouse is supposed to be the mirror to the other spouse. It's like, look, hey, like, you don't wake up for Fajr. That's a problem, right? They're not going to make an excuse. He's just lazy. No, you're not supposed to accept these kind of things, right? So that's what it is. Marriage is a system of optimization. We have to refine ourselves because this person should not tolerate us. And you know what the worst part is? This person is tolerating us. That means they don't have no standards. Then you're married to a person who has no standards, which means you'll never be pushed to be better. And what kind of marriage would that be? Right? Where bettering is not a standard. That would be worse than prison. Because at least prison, it's stagnation. Right? It's the same thing every day. Right? That would be better than this. Okay, so عن إكرمة رضي الله عنه عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال إني لأحب أن أتزين للمرأة كما أحب أن تزين لي لأن الله عز وجل يقول ولهن مثل الذي عليهن. And he quotes a verse. Ibn Abbas says, I would like to beautify myself for my spouse just like she beautifies herself for me, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and they have exactly what you have, right? Okay, maxim number 7. And we have about 5 minutes left, so we're not going to get through all of these, but that's okay, right? That was never the point. Through this non-binding bond, through which many binding bonds emerge, right? What this means is that marriage is optional in the sense that who you marry is your choice. But once you're married to this person, as a result of this marriage, which is optional, you get to choose. As a result of this, there's going to be many mandatory bonds that are going to come that you have to maintain and you don't have a choice. Does anyone understand this? So the bond of marriage is something you choose. You choose the person you're getting married to. But once you're married, there are connections through this bond that now are mandatory for you to take care of. Now you have relatives that have rights. So you better choose carefully, right? And that's why when you marry someone, you're not marrying them alone, you're marrying their people. You're marrying into their family. So you be very careful of what type of people these people are, because you're bonded to them now. You're not just marrying an individual, you're marrying a village. Her and whoever is acquainted with her. And they're in her circle of influence, and they're in her circle of concern, and they're in his circle of influence, and they're in his circle of concern. Right? So choose carefully. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ, out of his love for Sayyidatuna Khadija, would do things like this. Right? إِذَا أُتِيَ بِشَيْءٍ when anything was brought to the Prophet ﷺ, like gifts or meat, right? يَقُولُ he would say to Anas radiyallahu anhu, اذهبوا به إلى فلانة. Right? Give it to this so-and-so person. And he says, فَإِنَّهَا كَانَتْ صَدِيقَةَ خَدِيجَةَ because she was a friend of Khadija. Right? He gets something in Medina as a gift. He would say, Anas, take a little bit of this and give it to such and such person because she was Khadija's friend. That's association. Right? That's what he's honoring, that association. Khadija's passed away. This is in Medina. Right? Look, اذهبوا به إلى بيت الفلانة فإنها كانت تحب خديجة. Right? Give it to such and such person because they loved Khadija. That's enough for the Prophet to be graceful towards someone. Because they were associated to Khadija, they were friends with Khadija, they love Khadija. Right? So these bonds are important. Right? And as we move to communities where these sort of friendship bonds and these familial bonds are less and less existent, we get further and further away from these sunan. Right? Some of these sunan we can't even practice now. People get weirded out. Like, can you imagine you sending a gift to someone and they're like, why am I getting this gift? What's the hidden agenda here? It's like, no hidden agenda, right? It's just following the sunnah, right? And the next one is maxim number 8, marry not a male, neither a female, yes? Marry not a male, neither a female. This is not like written in 2024. This was written in 2016, right? I would have chosen better words if it was written, today. It says, marry not a male, neither a female, but the potential parent of your progeny. So what is it talking about? It's talking about marrying someone not for who they are today, but who they will be 5 years later, 10 years later from now. Okay? This is very, very, very important because when we're young, we think we're marrying the person who we see in front of us. Like, that's not true. That's not true. Right now, they're like a student. Or right now, they're like 21, 22, 24. What is this person going to be like when they're 32? What is this person going to be like when they're 35? Right? What attributes would they have? What trajectory in their life are they headed towards? You have to do that prediction, right? So this is from a course that I taught this summer that was really, really helpful to have an image of this. Marry a potential parent, right? Why? Because you have to marry someone who can raise the next generation of quality people for God. And how can someone do that if they're not a quality person with God? How's that possible? Can I have like this glass is water, okay? And can I pour this into this glass and it comes off as coffee or orange juice? Is that possible? So in Arabic they say that a glass with whatever it contains can only pour what it has within it. So how can you expect a person to help you raise the next Salahuddin, the next Ghazali, the next Ibn Taymiyyah, when they themselves are not like the mother of Salahuddin, like the mother of Ghazali, like the mother of Ibn Taymiyyah? It's not possible, right? So point 2 is mastery. The person who is trying to improve themselves. This is a very important characteristic in a person. And that's why you should never marry an arrogant person, because the arrogant person will have no growth. They already think they're all that. So one thing to look for is that, is this person studying? Are they bettering themselves? Are they taking care of themselves? Do they feel like they're already there, or they want to go somewhere higher? All right? Are they on the pursuit of mastery or not, or optimization? Because if they're not, then this is it. There's going to be no growth to this person for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. You're stuck with an immature person for the rest of your life, right? Yeah, who's around this person? Right? Who are their friends? Where do they hang out? Right? What kind of conversations are they having? Who's part of their village? Who's part of their system? Right? Right? How righteous is their focus in their interactions with other people? Right? How erudite they are. If that is something that is important to you, if knowledge is something important to you, then it better be important to your spouse as well. Otherwise, you'll have so many clashes, right? And so I'll go over this, inshallah ta'ala, because my time is up. We'll stop here, inshallah. So lastly, are they able to do this, right? Are they able to be an octopus parent, right? This is not a term, I just coined this, right? But it's really helpful, because what does it mean to be a parent? If you're trying to raise the next generation of amazing human beings, right? What does it mean? What are your roles? You have to be an octopus, meaning you have to play 8 roles simultaneously, right? In some moments, you have to be an imam, you have to be a role model. So if this person is not someone who is invested in the Quran, how is it possible that they will be a role model for your children later on, that they would be invested in the Quran? That's not possible, right? So a teacher, right? They say in Arabic, al-ummu madrasatul ula, that the mother is the first madrasa for a child. So are you marrying somebody who is able to be that first madrasa, right? The next one is a mentor, that they're able to do tarbiyah, mentorship. They're able to take the person from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, right? Which means emotional mentorship as well, intellectual mentorship, physical mentorship. Right? Then a disciplinary, right? Are they going to make sure that certain red lines are never crossed? Are they going to be able to do that? And if they themselves are crossing red lines, you think they'll be able to help someone else not cross those red lines? Will they be hypocritical in their parenting, right? Then cheerleader, right? It's like, are they going to be motivating this person to do great things? Because we all need this, by the way. So I wasn't actually going to come here today, right? Ustadh Daniel was supposed to teach this, right, as of this morning, because my wife is in pre-labor right now, right? So I was with her, and I told her, look, in the morning I said, no, the contractions are getting closer. Well, I'm going to stay. We've done this a couple of times. This is our third child, so this is like easy for me, easy for her. So like, no, I'll stay. And she's like, no, you need to go. I said, no, I'll stay, because Ustadh Daniel can take care of this, and I'll just send him my stuff. And he would have done a better job at this than me, by the way. So you guys missed out, okay? And she said, no, you need to go, because you have a commitment with the people there, and the students have a commitment with the people there, and you better go there. And because you go there, we'll inshallah have a righteous child, right? You see what happens when someone, like, you're married to a cheerleader, right? So I'm here because she sort of like pushed me out of the house, right, to do this thing, right? So these things are very, very important. We don't factor these things in when we're like 21, but we better do this. We better do this. These are things that are very, very important in the long run, right? And then the kind of friend that you'd be, that you can, a rafiq is someone who you can count on, right? A rafiq is someone that you spend all your good times with. But then a khalil is someone that understands you really well, right? They know exactly what you need, and without you asking, they fulfill. That's a khalil, right? And a wali is someone who's your ally, who you can depend on when things go out of the way, when things mess up, right? So that's supposed to be your spouse. Your spouse is supposed to have these characteristics. And by the way, this doesn't mean, and Ustadh Daniel will cover this, this doesn't mean you're looking for someone who's got, okay, I have a checklist of 8 things. So yeah, not really Rafiq material, but pretty good with a mentor. Yeah, I see that. No, it's that you become these 8 things, yeah? That's the idea. Like, you become that, and then it's very easy to attract someone who's like that, okay? And so we'll stop here, because our time is up, and I don't want to take into Ustadh Daniel's time. So we don't have a lot of time for questions, but if there's any 1 or 2 questions that are very pertinent, please ask. Yes, sister, go ahead. Your name, please. Yeah. Yeah. So temperament is important. More than gender, temperament is more important to understand, right? There could be a feisty man temperamentally, but there could be feisty women temperamentally as well. Okay, so I wouldn't say gender comes into a big picture here, but what does is their temperament. So, by the way, conflict is natural to a marriage. That's not the problem. The problem isn't the conflict. The problem is how you view a conflict. If you view the conflict as a means by which a marriage grows, then it's great. Have more conflicts. Because every time you have a conflict, you disagree on something, you discuss it. That's our next maxim, which we're not doing. But it's about how do you deal with those conflicts and make every conflict meaningful. And if you make the conflict meaningful, guess what happens to this entire marriage? It actually grows. You want to have more conflicts, right? Like we debate, like my wife and I debate all the time. But we have a like unwritten rule that debates aren't the problem. It's, are you respectful in those debates? Are you crossing any red lines? Because how do we get the optimized thing, right? We're discussing something. Let's say Asad and I are debating about something. We're actually doing a project together. And so Asad said, no, we're doing this. I was like, no, I want to do this. Okay, why should we do this? Well, he gives me his points. Like, I'll tell you why we should do this. And maybe, if we're sane, we come to some compromise on my side a little bit and his compromise, and the better idea that was not mine and that was not his brews from this, and that's the thing that we do. Isn't that growth? Aren't we all better because we had that debate? Okay, if that's what we mean by a conflict, great, go ahead. Put your gloves on. Go at it. Okay, if that's what we mean. But if we mean by conflict, being petty, right? Wanting to win an argument. Like if we mean by that, then there's no victory in that. Because the true victory is not in winning an argument with your spouse that you have to see all the time, right? Because if you win that argument, you've actually lost the battle, right? Because obviously, all the married people know this. So the point is not to win the battle. The point is to get the right thing done, right? And when you do that and you're not arrogant enough and humble enough to actually submit to when the other person has a better idea, then conflicts are actually really good, right? Conflicts aren't a problem. Right, any other questions? All right, awesome, good, alhamdulillah, you guys were awesome. Apologies for the late sort of session, but I hope this was beneficial to some degree. Getting to let the sisters have access, or Abdullah already has access to the slides. So if anyone wants the last few.
We'll actually just ask one quick question, if that's okay.
Sure, yes.
Yeah. So we did have a whole list of questions, but I'm just going to choose one because we are short on time.
No problem.
So the question is, what types of conversations should we be having to figure out these maxims during the courting process?
Yeah, that's good, alhamdulillah. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. What I would suggest is, I had a friend from high school, and he married a Catholic. And he had a very interesting process, because the church that he wanted to get married to, the Catholic Church in Yvonne, that he wanted to get married into, they said that you have to do a 6-week course on marriage ethics. And that's the only way we can officiate your marriage, right? This was like 2018, right? Then 2020 happened, COVID, and divorce rates across North America went up, and marital discords went up, and disputes went up. And so one of the things that I decided, and I spoke to a couple of my teachers about that as well, and all of my teachers said, yeah, someone should do this. And I've been staring at them like, yeah, why isn't anyone doing this, right? Why don't we just put people through a pre-marriage course, right? So at least people learn the fiqh of things. You know how many people get into marriage conflicts and they don't know how to do mediation by themselves because they never learned these things? So they do the weirdest things, right? Like to anger Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Or for things that aren't even one of the maxims we should have covered that we didn't get time to cover is like, how do you pull the plug? Like one of the things that you do is people can get into a divorce, but what is the proper way in the religion to actually divorce someone in which you're not incurring a sin? Because you guys know, so the vast majority of the divorces that happen are all sinful. There's not some opinion I have, all right? This is just the truth of the matter. It's like most men, which is, by the way, divorce is a right of the man. Like you have to know how to divorce someone before you get married. Not because, that's what you're gonna do, but if push comes to shove, like, when you sit in an airplane, right? Before the airplane takes off, they tell you, in case of an emergency, here the doors are, here's where the thing is gonna come from, the mask. And if you're like, yeah, whatever. And then the plane goes down and you have no idea what to do. So you do start doing weird things. And then you'll die because you didn't pay attention to the safety advice. That's what learning your fiqh of divorce is. You do that before marriage. In case things go down, you better know what to do, because it's not worth incurring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wrath over, right? So what I would suggest is everyone take you don't have to do it with me or with anybody else. You do a premarital course, or at least talk to your shuyukh, your local shuyukh. We would have this in our tradition, like people would actually go ask their shuyukh. Firstly, everyone would have a sheikh in traditional Islam. They would have a teacher. And they would say, okay, what are the things you can impart on me as wisdom? I'm about to do this thing, which is a huge thing in my life. What would I need, right? So those things are important. And then to actually have serious conversations with each other, like you should know these things. These are important things.